At no age is it normal for you to completely lose your libido. Now, there was so much about their body they needed support with that they weren't getting support with. They've been taught certain things like painful periods is just the way it is for women. This is false. We haven't had great research funding for women's medicine. Mostly we've been just treated like small men. You're the only one that knows what your normal is. So if you feel like something's not normal, that should be respected, that should be listened to.
Welcome to the XO Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rishma Walji. This is a podcast for growth-oriented people who want to live their own extraordinary life. People who want to live intentionally, people who want deeper connections with themselves and others. We talk about wellness, brain science, shifting automated habits. We talk about not just wanting to be optimistic, but also how to shift your thinking. We talk about how to juggle family and work and life responsibilities. We talk about identity and dreams, aging well, and redefining ourselves. Be sure to subscribe. I'm glad you're here. Thank you, Dr. Brighten, for being here. I have your book. I love it. Let me just say that I think this is required reading for so many women, even men. I feel like it just helps to open up the conversation that we always want to have, but we don't. And your writing is it feels like you're just talking to a friend. So I just love it. It's really, really accessible. So what prompted you to write this book?
Oh, well, I appreciate all of that. And patience, women, listening to them is what prompted me to write the book. And I was writing this during the pandemic, which was a time where I think so many women realized that there was so much about their body they needed support with that they weren't getting support with their doctors. I think they knew this, and yet at that point, doctors were even more inaccessible. As we all know, we went through that. I set out to write this book. So I wrote Beyond the Pill. And if people are not familiar with that, it's a book talking about being on birth control, the potential side effects, how to protect yourself against those if you want to stay on the pill, how to mitigate the side effects, how to be successful with it, and then how to transition off. But it's called Beyond the Pill because it's about having options beyond just birth control. It's about there is life beyond the pill and that we can look beyond the pill for root cause solutions. And as that book came out, it became so apparent to me that there were just so many unanswered questions. And so women slide into my DMs, or, I get messaged, or people follow me to the bathroom sometimes in public, or I'm talking with a patient. And it always comes back to, is this normal? And we haven't been taught about it. There's only about 18 states in the United States that are providing medically accurate sex education, which is where reproductive health is housed under, which includes just understanding your anatomy and your physiology. And so much of what happens in women's medicine is because this information is gatekept. So what I mean by that is women feeling like they didn't have a choice. Their doctor just told them the way it was, or things like, my period is heavy and painful, but my doctor says it's normal, but it's not. And because of their doctor telling him that delayed an endometriosis diagnosis, for example, by more than a decade.
Yeah, for sure. I'm in Canada and the education is changing and becoming better over time. But I used to say this with my patients too. I would see, like, we talk about puberty and in middle school, like you're grade 7 or something like that. And then you don't really talk about it again until you're trying to have kids. And then after that, you don't talk about it again until you're going through menopause. And it's like there's these gaps where especially women's bodies change so much and so often, and we don't have the information. And people you would come into me and say, I wish I knew you 20 years ago. Like, why didn't I know this information? So I'm so glad that you wrote this book. I think it's so needed. And I want to start off by asking, I feel like a lot of women know their bodies and then ask for help. And, as you said, they're told that, oh, this is normal, you have pain and whatever. And it delays their diagnosis, it delays their understanding of their bodies. But I also feel like sometimes we don't have the information we need. And so we can't understand our bodies. And so it's much more likely that we're going to believe someone who tells us that it's normal when we know inside that it really isn't. So can you talk a little bit about that self-awareness?
I think that's such an important point that you touch upon. And this is something that I'm constantly reminding people, is that you live in your body. So you're the only one that knows what your normal is. So if you feel like something's not normal, that should be respected, that should be listened to. Unfortunately, when you look at the statistics, so I'm not familiar with the statistics in Canada, but in the United States, something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, where you have irregular periods, you have acne, you have oily skin, maybe you have hair loss on your head, but you're growing it on your chin. And that also comes with a host of mental health risks and cardiovascular risks and metabolic risks. So it is not just a reproductive issue. And yet that condition can take 2, 3 doctors before you actually get the diagnosis. As I was talking about with endometriosis, we can see that it's like, can be 10 to 20 years before someone gets that diagnosis. And so much of that is because one, we haven't had great research funding for women's medicine. Mostly we've been just treated like small men. It wasn't until the 90s that the United States was like, hey, as it turns out, women's bodies are different when it comes to drug interactions. And like you have to include them in clinical trials, even though I
Who would have thought?
know that like they're so complicated and nobody wants to deal with that. But like you got to do it. It wasn't until 2024 that we had a president actually take a major initiative to fund women's health, like research. This is insane when you consider this. So I want people to understand that there's a huge gap in terms of the research. There is huge bias in medicine, and any doctor who's denying it is not reading the research and they're not listening to their patients, because there are doctors who, and I want to say, like doctors, healthcare practitioners overall, who have been taught certain things, like painful periods is just the way it is for women. This is false. And PMS, everybody gets PMS. I had somebody just the other day, a patient came in, she's like, I left my doctor because he had said to me, what did you think? Your cycles are supposed to be easy? Like cycles are supposed to be awful. Like periods are awful. Like, why are you expecting anything different? You're a woman. This is the way it is. And she was like, I immediately just got up and was like, I can't do this anymore. And she's like, that was after so many visits invested with this provider of trying to get answers. And so if you feel that you have been brushed off, gaslit, dismissed, I want you to know the research absolutely supports this. As I go through and is this normal? So there's a chapter called Sex of All Kinds. And people, it's so funny because there's been reviews where people are like, why is she like talking about all this sex stuff? Because like if we don't talk about, firstly, we don't talk about periods, we don't talk about hormones, we don't talk about menopause, we don't talk about all these things, we certainly don't talk about sex. But Sex of All Kinds, that chapter is actually opening, talking about pain with sex, talking about how when we see women in the ER, the statistics on this going in for heart attacks, for strokes, for abdominal pain, they aren't given the same pain management as men. They aren't even oftentimes given the same diagnosis in men in certain hospital settings. And what I mean by the same diagnosis is like, you both have hearts, you're equally having heart attacks here, but women are presenting differently and they're being sent home, they're being dismissed. So if doctors aren't taking heart attacks seriously, if they're not taking abdominal pain seriously, understand that your sex life, like your this thing that like most doctors don't even think like is, totally necessary for women to be healthy. I shouldn't be saying like most doctors and all of this, but there's enough doctors where people have experienced this. And doctors, and I will say most doctors aren't educated about women's sexual health to the degree that they really need to be in order to support their patients. But pain with sex is one of those things that is often dismissed, and yet it can be a sign of chronic condition like adenomyosis, endometriosis, fibroids. It could be vaginismus. It could be that there is inflammation, that there's an infection. Like this is something that should be taken seriously. And I outline all the research in the book showing how women's stories are often dismissed and overlooked. But back to like, why is the chapter named that? Because women are also taught that unless they can have penetrative sex, they're not complete. There's something dysfunctionally wrong with them. And I have just experienced so many patients who are like, well, because of my vaginismus, I can't have penetrative sex. Therefore, I'm somehow lesser. Can't have the same pleasure. And I really wanted to illustrate that there are other ways to have sex while you work on this pain with sex diagnosis and understanding what's going on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of doctors, even if they're well-meaning, even if they want to help you, they don't know. They're not necessarily educated in nutrition as much as they could be, or as much as you might need, right? Like that's why we have other types of healthcare providers, so you can access all the information that you need. Speaking of that, I wanted to just tell you a story. I have two teenage daughters, And I grew up thinking, of course, like as many people do, now I've learned so much about hormones. And even I was so surprised by some of this work. And so I really wanted my daughters to have this positive sort of association with their periods. And of course, a lot of women have problems, but I'm really about educating them. How can you balance your body? How can you understand your body? How can you manage your pain? And so my kids have been taught ad nauseum about their periods. They're only teenagers. And I actually wanted to change. I didn't want to have a period party and embarrass them. But I did buy a piece of jewelry, their first sort of real jewelry. And when they got their periods,
Yeah.
I was like, this is a representation of, you know, the fact that you're sort of moving into this other phase of womanhood. And I just wanted to create sort of a positive space for them. And it was really beautiful. So I guess moving into how we can make things more positive for women who have been going through a lot, maybe don't understand their body. You talk about sex, and I want to say, I feel like this is a topic that I used to be asked a lot, maybe because of my cultural background. We don't in our culture talk about sex at all. It's not, you know, it's a taboo. It's not something you ask about. It's not something you know. And I even did a whole episode with someone who actually her marriage broke up because she wasn't able to ask the questions that she needed to be able to communicate with her partner to have a healthy
Yeah.
sex life. And so let's just talk about sex and how libido changes throughout a woman's lifespan or throughout a woman's time frame, whether it's pregnancy, menopause, all of those things. Let's just talk about some of the basic things that women really need to know about libido and sex. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, I wanted to let you know there are so many more audio only episodes on the podcast version. Some of the episodes are quick tips, some of them are narrative style. They are all amazing. There's topics like curating friendships, redefining success, living with ambient stress, and so much more. Be sure to check out the audio only version of the podcast on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts.
When it comes to libido, I want you to know it is a complete myth that just because you get older, you lose the desire for sex. That is not true. So it is often portrayed in social media, in the major media, in a lot of ways that just because women get older, they become less interested in sex. They're going to lose their sexual desire. At no age is it normal for you to completely lose your libido. Now let's get into the nuance of this. So what I mean by that is that no one should ever say, you're just getting older, and leave it at that. There are several types of sexual desire and factors that can impact it. So we often see this spontaneous desire where like two people just meet and their clothes fly off and like there's no condom, there's no lube, there's nothing. Like people are just having sex and like they're just into it all of the time. And that is a very popular way to portray it. And that is called spontaneous desire. There's a different kind of desire, which is responsive desire. And that is where once things get going, now you're in the mood for it, but you're not the person who's just walking around thinking about sex. Both of those are normal. So whenever people talk about a declining libido, I'm like, what are you comparing it to? Because it's your normal that we want to know about. Has it actually changed? If you're comparing it to your neighbor or your friend or even like your partner, it might not matter. It might not be anything worth writing home about, right? Because it's like, this is your normal. However, if you've been going through life and you're like, yeah, this has been my normal and something changes, we don't chalk that up to age. We need to dig deeper. We need to understand what could potentially be the cause. So hormones are the obvious one, but it's not so obvious which hormones it would be. So when we say libido, what hormone do you think of?
Oh, most women, I think, would say testosterone.
Right? Because we've got the male archetype in research, and this is the gold standard. And then there's this inferior version over here with baby making accessories. And men have a strong libido, and it's all about testosterone. So it must be true for you as well. Yes, and estrogen actually plays a primary role in your desire for sex, your fantasies, your ability to self-lubricate, to have arousal. So there's the desire for sex when we're wanting sex. Then there's the body's response, which is arousal. And so estrogen's a key player. But one of the biggest things that gets forgotten is that the ovary owner's body is set up to be super sensitive to the environment. And so the shifts of cortisol and insulin can also impact your desire for sex. And that is because in extreme states of stress, some people want to have sex. I just want to say that's normal. But a lot of people will experience that their hormones shift in a way that's about physiological survival, not procreation. And the fastest way to shut down you potentially getting pregnant is to make you not want to do the thing that would make you get pregnant. So there is the hormone component, and I outline all of that in the book, and I take you through a whole program of like how can you improve your hormones, not just for your sex life, but for your entire life. These hormones, they interact with every single system in the body. If you want complete health, if you want longevity, if you want to feel your best, we've got to take care of your hormones. But then there's other factors as well. What's your relationship like? Have you gone through a major stressor that's more than just hormones? It might be grief. You have to process that grief. Did you just have a baby and you feel touched out? People who have children, this is something that you'll be very aware of and been very familiar with. And people who don't, it's the idea that when your child touches you, they need something. They need something from you, and it's a demand. And that's all well and good, except that now your brain starts picking up the touch is a demand, and your partner tries to touch you and you're like, I can't, it's too much. Or is it a situation where maybe you're struggling with body image issues? Body image issues, which if you don't have them, tell me your secret, because from the day that we become aware of our own body, there are messages out there to shame us about it. But this is one of the top things that will get people out of the mood, make it so that even when they're having sex, they fall out of it. They're on the sideline spectating, watching themselves, being like, oh, do I have rolls right now? Can they see my cellulite? Like, people who are having sex, like, with you, their brains are flooded with feel-good hormones. Trust me, they're not looking at that. They're not being like, oh, what's their body like in this position? But we still get in our heads about that. The other thing that's a top one for women is the risk of unintended pregnancy. And this brings us full circle back to the myth of just because you get older, you become less interested in sex. Two things happen when women get into their 40s and then they cross into their 50s. And when they get into menopause, there is no longer the risk of an unintended pregnancy. That barrier has just dissolved and went away. The other thing is that women tend to get a lot more comfortable with their body. They have a lot more acceptance. They have a lot of wisdom. So they understand that what I really feel like the birth of my second child brought me this epiphany, which is that my body wasn't made to be looked at. My body wasn't designed to be looked at. It was designed to do amazing things like birth a human or run a marathon or, just any of the major things that we do in our life, and all the minor things too. Like, it serves such a bigger purpose. And so what I often see, yes, hormones play a role postmenopausal. You may need hormone replacement therapy because that can impact your sexual desire. But many women report becoming menopausal. So they step into that new archetype and they absolutely have better sex. They desire it more because these major barriers that had been on their mind their entire life, those are now been removed, and they're able to enjoy themselves so much better. And sometimes I get challenged on this. And if people are like, yeah, right. I saw somebody the other day on social media being like, old people don't have sex. Old people have so much sex that nursing homes have STI outbreaks. You can see this in the research. We also have to screen them for UTIs like all the time because they have so much sex, and they have so much unprotected sex because there's no risk of pregnancy. So I don't know how you were taught in school, but I just remember I actually I was getting a psychology minor as part of my degree, and I took like the psychology of aging, and I was floored in my 20s when they were just like, man, like all of these elderly people just talking about how much they're getting it. And like, I was like, I had believed the myth. So my 20 something self got like, sobered up. But then when I was in med school, and they were talking about, we were studying geriatrics, and they're like, you got to screen for STIs, you got to screen for UTIs. Like these people are having so much sex. And I'm like, wow, yes, actually, this is true. So everybody just know it's not over just because you're aging.
Yeah, and they should be having sex. Sex is such a big part of life and such a big part of relationships. And I was lucky that I had a very, very open relationship with my mom, which is, I think, is very unusual with people. But she would talk to me about everything and her sex life, even as she was going through menopause, maybe because I was in healthcare, I don't know. But I think it's actually really empowering to know these things, to expect the right things. I believed a lot of other myths, and I think I was even shocked, even having known all the stuff about hormones. A lot of my patients end up having careers, or they're having trouble with their hormones, and then they start trying to have kids and it doesn't work, and then they go through these
Yeah.
fertility challenges, and they have kids, let's say in their late 30s, early 40s at some point, and then they get completely blindsided by menopause or perimenopausal symptoms because they have a toddler, they're not expecting it, and we hear about menopause as like, oh, it's hot flashes, and that's sort of all you hear about. That's all you think
Yeah.
about when you think about hot flashes, but it's so much more than that. So just transitioning in, because I think also not just this, the libido sometimes goes up for women, but there are other things that are happening in your body. You might get other
Yeah.
symptoms that you're not expecting, vaginal dryness, mood changes, these kinds of things. So maybe we'll transition and talk about libido, but also menopause more in general, perimenopause, because I think that's something that women are not expecting and go through.
Totally. So I want people to know that talking about perimenopause and menopause is relatively new. Things that I've said to my patients for years is like, train now for menopause. Literally train now. You would train for a marathon. I think the same thing about when you're pregnant, you're training to give birth, but you also have to recover in that postpartum phase. And I want people to understand that the recovery aspect of like, your body's going through transitions and like, let's ease off in some ways and support it. That's not really supported in our culture overall. Now, let's back up with like, let's talk about hormones. So, okay. And I just want to acknowledge, as somebody who had a baby, my second baby was in 40. I'm actually going through fertility treatments. If it works, I'm gonna have another baby. And I just I'm like sobering up to like, oh God, like I'm gonna go through menopause and have teenagers. And that's not fair. Like that's hard when like you,
It's hard.
especially like because I have boys, people are always like, oh, just girls' hormones. I'm like, oh, have you? No, hang out with some boys. Okay. Those hormones, they also be crazy. And that's like what we hold space for that, right? For teenagers. Perimenopause, same. Okay. It is like hormones can be crazy because what's happening? So let's talk through that. Okay. So everybody starts with the hot flashes, right? That is actually not the first symptoms that I typically see of perimenopause with my patients. Now, what I typically see first is PMS starts ramping up. Sleepless nights start, like I'm getting disrupted sleep. I have a hard time falling asleep. I'm tossing and turning at night, start feeling more anxious. What are those all signs of? Progesterone declining. That is what's happening in perimenopause. It's like, I feel like the focus is always all about estrogen, and estrogen is very, very important. And yet we forget about the role of progesterone sometimes. So in early perimenopause, this is where, and I want people to know, like most of the time, I'm going to disagree with doctors when they're like, oh, I can't test hormones. They fluctuate all the time, except if you want to have a baby, then they'll test them all. But in perimenopause is a time when if you're like periods are starting to space out and periods are starting to become irregular, it's not worth testing because 1 month I'll test you and you look fine. And the next month I'll test you and you look like you're in menopause. And the next month I'll test you and you look fine. That's perimenopause. It's a lot of like ups and downs. So when we start that early perimenopause, which could be in your mid 30s, it doesn't have to be, but I think if you're in your mid 30s, you might as well just start training for making it better because what you do today, it's going to make today better. It's going to make tomorrow even easier. So why not get in on that? Now, the ovaries produce progesterone only once you've ovulated. You ovulate, a temporary endocrine structure known as the corpus luteum is created, and now you make progesterone. Welcome to your luteal phase. That should extend at minimum 10 days, but we really want to get longer than that. And why that's important is because, and why is that the standard? Because when you get pregnant, fertilization actually happens in the fallopian tubes. And then that little, ball of cells is going to divide and become an embryo. And then it's going to implant in your uterus. And that's going to take several days. And we have to have uterine lining that's stable for that via progesterone. Now, progesterone gets metabolized, and the metabolites of progesterone stimulate the GABA receptor in the brain. Now you feel more calm, more relaxed, you sleep better, you're less anxious. The vibe's not murdery before your period comes. That's what happens when estrogen's unopposed. You're like, if my partner breathes one more time in my space, like I'm gonna lose it. That's usually a state of low progesterone. So that's where things start. And then we're told that PMS is normal, all these things are normal. It's not. So we start the progesterone decline. Then as the ovaries become, I want to like call them dysfunctional, but this is exactly how they were designed, but it feels when you're in it, it feels dysfunctional because they're not ovulating as regularly. So now perimenopause is going further towards away from reproductive years. You ovulate less frequently. You can't make progesterone. Now estrogen is unopposed. And then estrogen might start dipping up and down, up and down. Now, what happens there? We get hot flashes. We also get brain fog. We can feel depressed. Serotonin will chase estrogen around. So if serotonin is chasing estrogen and estrogen's declining, we're going to feel more sad. Now, that's not the only aspect of affecting our mood is estrogen and neurotransmitters, but also we lose immune system regulation because we need progesterone and estrogen to help with blood sugar stabilization. So insulin sensitivity declines as estrogen declines as well. And when we get that insulin fluctuating, we have blood sugar issues. That's going to affect neurotransmitters, but we can also have inflammation taking place. That's all going to affect your mood as well. When estrogen declines, you're probably going to feel less motivated. Thanks, dopamine. You want to work out less because you're less motivated and your joints hurt. The other thing you might notice is estrogen declines, breasts get droopy, they lose fullness. I've had patients multiple times, the language has been rocks in socks. Like you drop some rocks in socks and they're just hanging there. And look, like these are mature women's breasts. I don't think anyone should feel ashamed. I think this too when and like if you never want to have a baby, you can't have a baby. I don't mean this in any disrespect, but the breasts don't reach the full development, full maturation until they've gone through pregnancy and breastfeeding. And you don't even have to breastfeed, but they develop in that way. And that's actually the final stage. So this is just like a scientific perspective. That's the final stage of development. And I have a whole chapter on breasts in my book talking about all of this and talking about like, yeah, like just the mind-boggling messages that we've received about breast. So I described all these hormonal changes. There are lots of things that you can do. So like when we're talking about mood, this is something where saffron, it rivals SSRIs. I talk about in the book saffron not only for moods. When SSRIs cause anorgasmia, the inability to orgasm, lack of sexual desire, known side effects of this, saffron can help. So it can help your mood, it can help your sexual desire, it can help your orgasms. And every food in the world that contains saffron is like the most delicious thing you can eat. So I'm like, if nothing else, just like put it on your plate, like start eating more saffron. So saffron can be really beneficial. These are times as well, if you're not on an SSRI, we might bring in 5-HTP. That's for helping serotonin production. We might bring in L-theanine to help with anxiety, and that's really lovely to take at night. Or we might be bringing in progesterone, just straight up progesterone. You can use all these things together, by the way, but bringing in progesterone, usually it's about 100 to 200 milligrams micronized progesterone. And you take that if you're still cycling post ovulation until your period. Some people have to stop on like day 26 just so that they'll actually bleed. Some people's bodies are like, yeah, it's nice to have progesterone. I'm still going to do my thing. And other people's bodies are like, no, I need you to stop. Otherwise I won't shed the endometrial lining. And then once we get into the phase where the symptoms of estrogen are low, and I have a whole checklist and is this normal? But if the symptoms are low, I don't need labs to know that. I need your story. That's what really matters in guiding this. That's where we think about bringing in estrogen therapy and even using just a topical patch of a very small dose can help people's moods. But what the other thing we know is the earlier you start it, so we want to get that in before we reach that like 6-year mark post-menopausal. So, but even in perimenopause, the sooner we start it, the more protection we have for our brain, the more protection we have for our heart, and the more protection we have for our bones, but also the less likely we are to be prescribed an antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication because of those adverse mood changes. So I hope people understand like what I've just illustrated here is that estrogen and progesterone, their decline is going to affect many symptoms, many systems in your body, leading to many symptoms. And that hot flashes, they suck. I actually just had to go through a 2-month course of Lupron for my endometriosis, adenomyosis. I would not recommend that long term. And there's lots of other things to do. I'm just at an age where I had to shrink it fast if I want to put a baby in me. And that's just like what I was left with. So with that, most people are going to perimenopause. Their body's transitioning over a 7 to 10 year period. I got a 2 week period, 2 weeks to get like that. My body just from like awesome hormones, zero hormones. And I'm actually really grateful for it because all these protocols I've been using with patients, like I put into play with myself, and I was like, this works really well and is like thank goodness for that. But also I was grateful to experience like the hot flashes, the joint, like to have that experience now to really empathize more with patients and to understand like, okay, what is this actually like when I'm telling you like, oh, no motivation, you may have no motivation, to actually have felt that. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's really hard. You just have to be like, I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to do it anyway. You have to get activities that make you be active. Like you have to find things that bring you joy. It's not enough to just be like, just go to the gym.
I have so many more questions. I want to do like a little bit of a rapid fire. I feel like also I used to tell my patients too, like I'm a woman too. We're going through this together. And as much as I know about it, I still have moments where I'm like, oh, I didn't sleep. What's going on? Or my mood was off. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, right, maybe there's something here that I need to be doing for myself. So I just leading into, I think even when I'm doing decision making work, even beyond the hormone stuff, I think it's very similar that I usually teach people like how to listen to themselves, how to listen to their bodies, how to understand the language that their body speaks, because you have to kind of understand what your body's trying to tell you when it says that I'm not sleeping well, or when the mood changes. There's a reason for that, and they might not understand why that is, but if they at least recognize that it's happening, then there's a way that they can seek that information through work like yours and things like that. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is how to listen to your body, how to listen to your emotions, how to listen to your thoughts, and really understand what it's trying to tell you. Is there something that, in case people weren't following the science, that you can tell women that might be listening, like how do they actually understand what's happening in their own bodies?
Track your data, write it down. There's patterns there, and you are absolutely smart enough to find them, to discover them, to understand them. And so I absolutely recommend that people who are cycling track your cycle. Use fertility awareness method as a tracking method, not necessarily for your pregnancy prevention, but to know the signs to be looking for. And I go through and is this normal? Different scenarios, different situations, different conditions, all the things to be tracking to understand your body and to understand what works for you. Because the only things like universally true for everyone is that you need to breathe, you need to exercise, you need to sleep, you need to drink water. But when we start talking about like cold plunges, meditation versus like mindfulness walking, like these kinds of things, you have to find what's true for you, what works for you.
Yeah, for sure. Something that I notice, even in my own personal life, but even with patients and people I talk to, is that we're so trained as a society to just push through everything. And especially women, because we have our cycles, it's like just do more, just go faster, just go harder, never take a break. And then we don't understand our bodies. If we're feeling off,
Yeah.
we don't pay attention to it. We just push through, push through. And it's not just about productivity and burnout, but it's about actually ignoring the signals that are happening in our body. So you talk a lot about adrenal glands and stress and all of that stuff. Do you have, maybe you can share some insights?
Oh gosh. So if you think about men as the sun, they rise and they fall with their hormones, and it's pretty predictable every day. Women are more like the moon. It's an entire cycle. It's almost a whole month that we go through of hormones changing. And we are in a society that tells us different things like take the pill to keep up with your male counterparts because why are you fluctuating? That you should just push through, ignore your body, work harder, hustle, sleep when you're dead. No, sleep now, because sleep when you're dead, that's just going to get you closer to death. Like, don't do it. Bad news. I think really honoring your body, we saw, so congratulate Spain for this. They actually have period leave now where they're like, hey, why don't you work from home or take the day off when you have a period? We don't see this in the United States. We see, oh, if you have that problem, just take birth control, just get an IUD, just take Midol, just, suck it up. Hey, we even got like hot packs and TENS units that you can just put on your body and still go to work, walk around. Nobody will know that you have that going on. And that's what I'm talking, even postpartum moms get this message of like, you should just keep going. You should just push through. Like that has been the expectation on us for so long, is that you push down your discomfort, you push through whatever's going on, you smile while you're doing it all. And that doesn't serve us. And from the hormonal perspective, you don't want cortisol up. It's a pro-aging hormone. It's a really, really good thing until it is so high that it is deleting brain cells and causing you to age more quickly at a cellular level.
Yeah, for sure. Something you talk about, even in Beyond the Pill, I remember reading it and thinking it's so useful even for people who weren't on the pill, because you talk a lot about just healing your body and, gut health and inflammation and things like that. What are some tips that you have for people just around some of these basic things that can be so, so beneficial, but that we don't even realize we can do?
Fiber. Eat 25 grams of fiber every day, no matter where you're at in life, whatever phase that you're in, but especially as you are in that perimenopausal phase. So fiber is going to feed the good gut bugs. Yes, we love that. And they play a major role in hormone regulation via the estrobolome and also inflammation and what is happening with cortisol. The fiber in most people's diets is far too low. If you're not at 25 grams today, let's say you're at 5 grams, well, you're going to add another five. And you're going to eat 10 grams a day for the next week. And then the following week, you're going to eat 15 grams. And you're going to keep increasing until you get to 25. Now, why this is especially important is that as estrogen declines, our microbial diversity declines. I want people to understand microbial diversity is associated with so many benefits in terms of your mood, longevity. Anytime that we get concerned about gut health, we look towards like, how diverse is your microbiome? It is that important. Fiber is going to help with that diversity. Fiber is going to help you maintain that. If your estrobolome is healthy, your vaginal ecology is going to be a lot healthier. And so this is why I recommend 25 grams of fiber a day, getting that in, reduce your sugar intake. And I know it's not a wildly popular thing to say because, there's this whole anti-diet culture movement. I understand what diet culture has done, and the science is really clear that 25 grams of added sugar is already a lot. And if you're exceeding that, we're going to end up putting ourselves at risk of metabolic issues. So especially perimenopause, menopause, when you start seeing that belly fat, that visceral adiposity, so fat starting to pack around our organs, not enough fiber, too much sugar coming in, we have to address those things straight away. And those are just some easy shifts that you can make right now to start making improvements for your hormones.
Yeah, I used to say that if everyone could just drink more water, eat more vegetables, move every day, and balance their blood sugar levels, half of the problems, the healthcare diseases that are out there would be gone. And I feel like it is such a simple thing, but also really hard to do. Even me, I sometimes forget, and I have to actually train my brain to build these habits into my own life as well. What is something that I used to hear this a lot, like, I wish I met you 20 years earlier. I wish I knew this earlier. See you. I know part of the reason you wrote this book is so that they would be empowered to do things on their own. But what is something that you feel is so really critically important that you wish all women would know?
Oh, there's so many things. I would say that tracking your data is one of the most powerful tools you have to understand your own body and to troubleshoot things. And that's going to dovetail on healing doesn't happen in a doctor's office. Healing happens with the choices you make at the grocery, the choices that you make, whether you're going to get out of bed this morning and go for that walk or not, whether you are going to just, spend all day on the couch. That's not always a bad thing, by the way. But the choices that you're making, what you put at the end of your fork is such powerful medicine. These are the things that bring you health. These are the ways that we really heal every single day. Yes, sometimes we need medications. Yes, sometimes we need surgeries. Yes, sometimes we need those higher medical interventions. And yet I would still contend that healing is an individual course. It is something that you take action on. Even if you are supposed to take a medication, you're the one who takes it every day. You're doing that. And I think we need to empower more patients to understand that their choices can make a significant difference in their life and remind them that they're the ones who did that. Instead of, sometimes I see doctors that are like talking about how they were able to heal this patient. And I'm like, in reality, they healed themselves. They did the work. Because when you are in a chronic state, so you have a chronic disease, it is work to move yourself out of it. And you deserve all of the glory in that.
What about hygiene? Because I think that's a really important piece to discuss. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what should I be doing? How should I be cleaning? Am I going to get an infection? These kinds of things. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
We want tons of microbial diversity in the gut. We want almost no microbial diversity in the reproductive tract. That is because when you are growing lots of lactobacilli, you are like a farmer, okay? So like estrogen comes in, estrogen stimulates the cells produce glycogen, a sugar. That sugar feeds your crop. You're a little crop of like, I just see like little lactobacilli crop, like cows wandering around. But these lactobacilli are going to make acid, and that's going to optimize the pH. It is a perfect system that throws down against invaders and helps move things out. The vagina is self-cleaning. The vulva, which is the outside, is not. And you do want to wash your vulva. It doesn't require anything other than warm water and some friction. So like a water, want to use soap, you can. If you ever have odor down there, I actually go through a whole bunch of scenarios of the chapter's all about discharge, of why there could be odor. And sometimes it's bacterial vaginosis. Sometimes it's, there's something that shouldn't be there, or something that is there is overgrowing and not kept in check. But sometimes it's sweat, because the same glands that are in your armpits are also in your groin, and it has nothing to do with your vagina and everything to do with just the groin. So understand that putting anything in the vagina to wash it, that's risking disrupting your microbiome and putting you at risk of an infection. It's also a risk of shoving organisms up higher into like the tubes or anywhere else that shouldn't be there. And that can also be problematic. And I do want to honor, and I talk about this in the book, that the whole reason any woman ever thought she needed to do is because doctors started that myth and it's like that's what they thought. All right. Back in the day, they were like, this is what women need to do. But now we have newer information, and we should absolutely not be doing that. Unfortunately, there were such massive campaigns around this. So let's just take, I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, but like a little history here. When we didn't have access to contraceptives, Lysol, that was like douching, which is like feminine hygiene was like code for like kill sperm and protect yourself against pregnancy. And so this is like one reason why access to birth control is so, so important for women, because like, I don't want you putting Lysol in there. Like, we don't want to go back to those days, but also there's been so much marketing, especially targeting Black and Hispanic women or Latinas. There's been so much marketing to them that these two populations still continue to douche. And unfortunately, with a lot of endocrine disruptors, which are also causing hormonal issues. And so I hope that makes everybody like really just rethink, like go to the feminine hygiene section. And I just want you to look at the things I never, ever want you to buy. Just like moonwalk right out of that.
Yeah, no douching and also washing between the folds. Like your body there's so many parts of your body. I guess because of my background in South Asian culture, like we're not necessarily taught to explore our bodies, to understand our bodies, to appreciate our bodies. It's like, oh,
what culture is like, I'm just curious, because as you say this, I'm like, who, I don't know any culture, because I feel like this is like what comes up so often. Like, I come from a big Hispanic family. Nobody's talking about this stuff. Nobody's talking like, I mean, I was warned like not to douche. Like that was definitely something I was like warned about, of like, I just remember like, those conversations. But other than that, I just don't think these are things that like we've been allowed to just talk about openly with one another.
No, and so many cultures also think that, sex is dirty and women on their periods are dirty or unclean or unpure or whatever the case may be. And then we get these messages and then we get afraid to ask. And this is where I used to get so many questions about these things, where women would be like, I don't know who else to ask. I can't ask anyone else. And I'm like, please ask, just say whatever you want to ask, because you need to know. And it's really, really important. So thank you for sharing all of the work that you do. Where can people find out more information about you?
You can find me at drbrighten.com, drbrighten.com. That's my main hub. Tons of information there with research citations and lots of protocols shared to help you on your journey. And then you can find me anywhere on social media at Jolene Brighten.
Awesome. Thank you. And I really recommend this book for anyone who is listening or watching. It's a really, really good insight into your body. And I think everyone should know it. And as I said, I think men should know this stuff too, because it helps communication. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.